Okay, guys, so the stage is set. We're going to have our panel on how to grow the demand side of protocols, hosted by Daniel Olshansky from Pocket Network. Daniel and the panelists, please come.
These are probably the shiniest panel chairs I've ever been on, so never really sat a stage at a club before. So to get things started, for those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Olshansky. I'm one of the lead protocol engineers at Pocket Network. And today I was tasked with having a panel about how do we grow protocol side demand. And I'll be honest, when I was first asked this, I thought it was a pretty demanding task. Because when you ask about how to grow protocol side demand, I was thinking, well, what's the killer app? What's the killer use case? This seems pretty challenging. So the panel that we have here today will hopefully help us figure that out. So let's just kind of go down the line. And everybody feel free to introduce yourself, what you work on, kind of what your role is, and also take it as an opportunity to, if you want, to talk about how much demand your project has.
Hey guys, my name is Erik Ashdown. I'm the head of ecosystem with Covalent. Covalent is a data middleware infrastructure company. We take direct replicas of 40 blockchains and make it queryable from one unified API. I spend the bulk of my time figuring out how we're going to grow adoption, get more developers, and get more people using our API. Today we have over 30,000 API keys that have been issued, and at a given time, a third of them are actually actives, which is pretty. I'm still impressed by this every time I show up. So yeah, looking forward to talking about how to scale things, especially in a bear market.
Awesome. So I'm Doug Pekaniks. I'm the founder of a project called LivePeer, where we build the video infrastructure for Web3. So our users are developers building applications that look like Twitch or YouTube. Hopefully they're blockchain or Web3 connected in some way. And they use LivePeer to power all the live streaming, the video on demand uploading, and whatnot. We've been building for almost 6 years now. We've been live for 4.5 years on Ethereum and now Arbitrum. And this year alone, we've done over 100 million minutes of unique video ingested into LivePeer and encoded by the network across many different applications.
Awesome. Hey, I'm not sure if this is this switch. There you go. Okay. Thanks. Hey everyone, Matt Fontana here from Streamr Network. I'm head of ecosystem there. Streamr Network is a decentralized data infrastructure project. We've been going for about 5-ish years now, progressively decentralizing the network. We decentralized the full thing in February this year, seeing a lot of demand, especially in the Web3 project space that I'm really happy to talk about. But yeah, we're kind of like this decentralized pub sub network that can stream data without requiring any sort of central intermediary like Google or Amazon. So it's a real shame when a decentralized application needs to reach for one of these centralized services, and we help to provide that middleware so that they can really fully decentralize their stack.
Cool. So as you can see, we got some live streaming, decentralized pub sub, data indexing. And kind of the way I was thinking about it is, if you look at history, whenever you want to grow traffic, or whenever you really want something to really take off, look at 2012 with Google and ML. Cats were a pretty big driver. That's where like machine learning really took off when we started detecting, being able to analyze what videos have cats or not. Then in 2016, that's when CryptoKitties really took off. So the reason this panel was selected is I was thinking the prototypical example to get a lot of protocol side demand would be to get live streaming cats in a decentralized manner. And kind of hopefully today we'll figure out how we can make that happen.
That's the press release for after.
All right, so before we talk about how we can actually grow protocol side demand, one of the things that I'd be really interested to hear is, how did you guys get any demand at all? So if you have a story of how you got your first user or how you got your early adopters, whether that could mean maybe there was a gap in the market, or maybe you were your own first user, I think everyone here would be really interested to learn more about how you guys got those users.
That's an awful question in the sense that like it's brutal. I'm not the founder in this situation, but I was I was there the weekend that Covalent was built at a hackathon. And I remember talking to Ganesh, who is the CEO, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, we're taking a replica of all Ethereum data." I said, "What are you going to do with it?" He's like, I don't know. I'm like, "What do you mean you don't know?" He's like, "Someone will need it for something." I'm like, "What's something?" He says, "I have no idea." And it took 2 full years of just building this database and having absolute blind conviction that people are going to need a performant database to query historical Ethereum data from. And to me, that was kind of crazy because it's like there's no market. You just have blind faith that this is going to be a necessity. And there's a lot of conviction that comes along with that. And when I came back, I talked to him I think 2-3 years later, and he said, "Do you want to come work?" I said, "Well, what's the traction?" He says, "We have 5 paying customers." I'm like, "That's great. What's this? How do we scale this?" He's like, "Oh, we need to get like roughly 1,000 would be good of like, actual users." And so we stopped and we said, okay, well, let's work backwards. Like we need to get all these people, so we need to give away the API for free, right? We need to give it away for free. We need to do hackathons. We need to go out there and get into the world. We need to start just giving more away, coming up with use case templates and all these things. And I think that setting the goal really of what success looked like, and then just working backwards, saying, okay, well, in 12 months, this is where we need to be, and these are the types of use cases we want to be serving from our replica. And that just fueled, the product-led growth cycle, where you just see a lot of developers showing up complaining, which is great because then they give you ideas for product for features. They battle test your product, they make it better, and really like to start. And then once you see, I always think it's a blessing when you see a tweet go out. It's like, Covalent sucks because this, which in my mind is like you're complaining because you actually care and you want to use this. And so I think that's the stuff that really helps the marketing and helps get other people signing up and just starts building that snowball effect.
Great. So I think to get your first users, it helps to be really mission oriented, to have a strong mission that you're going after, and to build an ecosystem of people who believe in it and want to be part of it. And then kind of blockchain technology, and in particular token economics, are like this supercharging weapon that you can apply to that, because you can actually kind of make all of these missionaries owners in your network and have them responding to incentives in order to build on it and use it and make it better. And so a lot of the earliest users of LivePeer weren't really using it for the ideal scaled video application use cases that ultimately make a huge impact for, but they were using it because of this ideological alignment with the mission of being the world's open video infrastructure, being the video infrastructure for Web3. And so who were these users? Unsurprisingly, it's a lot of the people who are sitting in this room and will be at DevCon tomorrow's early people in the Ethereum ecosystem that said, hey, we're streaming our meetup or our event or our conference, and we want to try dog fooding these solutions. We want to try using a decentralized solutions. And so I think we did some of the early live streams out of like the first ETH Berlin conference, or you had the Ethereum core devs streaming their all core devs calls alongside also streaming it to YouTube and under dog food it. This was just like super beneficial for testing the platform, getting the bugs out, and there were many bugs, getting it working performantly. And even if streaming one-off events isn't sort of what drives millions of minutes of usage onto the network, it's still incredible for awareness and marketing, and it actually comes full circle here this week where LivePeer is powering all of the live streams out of DevCon and ETH LATAM today for the whole week. So it's been great to kind of be part of this ecosystem, be mission oriented, and lean into the use cases where people really want to see it succeed.
Great. Yeah. Oh. I think we might have switched out the... work.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so our first user was actually a lone developer, and actually just a guy, didn't speak much English, from Iran, that wanted to do something with the fair data economy. But he didn't have much funding. He was just a really smart guy with this vision, and kind of speaking to Doug's point, he was very ideologically aligned with the project. So he seeked us out, and he had this conversation with us. I want to kind of build this, what's known as a data union now, or a data DAO. You can think about this, but it's basically the essence is kind of owning your own data, which is a bit of a cliche, but with the Streamr protocol, you can really stand behind the technology and say that you have ownership of the data, just like you have ownership of your private keys. And so how we kind of bootstrapped our demand for our protocol was we kind of took a pragmatic approach. We gave Ibrahim a lot of funding, support, coaching in terms of how to use this raw technology. We have to be very authentic with ourselves and say that some of this decentralized technologies is a lot harder to use than the centralized alternatives. And to make that kind of trade between convenience and decentralization when you have to kind of build your startup is a very difficult task. So we kind of need to be the big brothers in the space and support these indie developers, these grassroots projects that are ideologically aligned, that really want to be the spearhead of this sort of mainstream adoption, this Web 2 to Web 3 conversion. And it's a long road, but that's how I basically see the most efficient way to scale out is to really support the grassroots movement.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things that kind of everybody hit on, and I'm glad I kind of managed to get that out of the question, is we're trying to figure out how we can grow protocol demand, like how we can get more users onto the platform. And I've listened to my fair share of Web 2 podcasts around find your first user, be your first user, just build a product and like start using it right away. But Erik, you said it's a horrible question because you're thinking 2 years out. There's going to be lots of people who need data. No one needs it right now. There's no data right now, but you're very forward-looking, right? Doug, you mentioned you have to be mission-driven. So it's kind of like there's this long-term vision. Right now we're kind of figuring things out. And over time, with every conference, with every conversation, we kind of get there, right? Matthew, you said that there was this one user and they kind of needed support. And you even mentioned there's trade-offs. Like you can use a centralized service today. It might be better. But again, you're thinking really long-term. And I think this is kind of one of the things that really brings us all here. Because especially when I got into crypto and I started thinking about this for a long time, it's very much the hammer kind of, are you a hammer looking for a nail type of question. And in crypto, I kind of always feel like a Schrodinger's cat, where I'm kind of the hammer and the nail at the same time. So kind of to follow up on that is, where do you think we are in that early adopter stage? Is it still we need to kind of lead the way in terms of saying like there's still trade-offs. You can still use a Web 2 service and it might be more efficient, but think long-term, or have we passed that hump and we're kind of, there is a very big value add with going straight to Web 3 or a decentralized solution?
I don't want to go first, but I will. It's a really hard question. No, because I'll add my context. I think I'm really curious to hear what you have to say, actually, or both you guys have to say. But I'll sort of give my perspective first. I think you have to be real about the decentralized stack and where you are. I think the three of you have built is super decentralized at a very early state. And I think that's you managed to build a lot of decentralization natively into it. There are huge trade-offs between going decentralized way too early and building a really good product. I think the number one thing you have to think of in the space is product, and like knowing your user and being customer obsessed, like understanding this is the use case they need, this is how they need to use it. And I think in a lot of cases, it's too early to take decentralization into account for that regard. Because if you are going to say, I'm going to decentralize, but before you have product market fit, or you have, you know what I mean, the bulk of the things are working and you're sort of innovative outside of the core product, I see a lot of issues with that. I think you're just, you're going for a vision. You're going for a vision which, is decentralizing too early is sort of a shortcut to get there. But in some cases, you just have to figure out novel ways to bridge the two. Some might be like, we're going to charge, credit card processing, or do something like this, and then just like issue USDC to whoever's staking this NFT. Like there are novel, simple things to do that aren't full-blown decentralization. But I think that's sort of where your brain has to be at the beginning, is like product-focused, user-focused, and everything else will sort of follow. I think as long as you follow that mentality and just have your vision at the end of the day, it makes it a lot easier to get there.
And Doug, before let me just interrupt real quick. as you guys know, we're still working on a lot of scalability issues. There's still a lot of latency in the network. So kind of let's build a new block slowly but surely. Zhen, you want to come onto the stage?
Thanks.
Yeah, so scalability is still an issue, latency is still an issue, but as you can tell, we have not lost liveness.
Sometimes the nodes are late, and that's me. Should I just do a quick?
Feel free to introduce yourself.
I'm Zhen. I'm one of the co-founders of Web3 Auth. We're also an infrastructure company. In particular, what we do is we do authentication, or more of like key management in the blockchain space. So long story short, we replace seed phrases with a multi-factor key that's powered with MPC. What allows you to do is it basically allows you to have a non-custodial social login on your application itself and reduces key loss in general. We've been around for about 2 or 3 years and glad to join this. So sorry for being kind of late here.
Yeah. Go for it.
Sure. So I guess we were what prompted this was talking about, hey, if we're mission oriented and we're bringing along early adopters for the ride, is it okay if we work with them and they know the experience is going to be subpar, or there's going to be issues? I think it's a little, that might be the only option. I mean, you might just have to bring your community along that way, but I think there's going to be issues if that's sort of your first principles approach. Like, I think you have to ensure that you're delivering at least like a table stakes, really good experience for the core problems that people have and need you to solve. And then you need something that's unique, that's uniquely enabled by Web3, by blockchain, by decentralization, that they're not able to get from the companies that have been operating in your space for 30 years and building product for 30 years that have every feature under the sun. What's the new unique thing that Web3 enables that you're kind of the gateway to, or that you offer, that enables someone to build something different? And I think that's sort of the exciting intersection of the space, where you see that right now it is really early. Like, the number of product visionaries and entrepreneurs and hacker teams and stuff that are experimenting with that is like large and growing, but that are actually committed and funded and committed to building these big disruptive things for years and years is still small. But like, that's the market that we all have the responsibility to help try and expand and grow through education, through awareness. And I think the pieces and the building blocks are there. Like, you can do highly disruptive things already, and we're starting to see examples of those. We're starting to see a lot of talent flow into the space, but you kind of know that you have this obligation to help grow that market while it's developing at the same time. I'm going to be giving a talk about this in about 4 hours for those of you that are still around as well. So,
cool. Yeah, I think we could even still be 5 years too early, and that's like a bit of a grim outlook, and it really sucked 5 years ago when we started off. And what's changed in the last 5 years is that these infrastructure projects have bubbled up, but we're still not competing yet with Web 2. We're still a long ways away. And when I go to these Web 2 conferences, it's still they look at me quite strange when I say fight the government, decentralization, etc., etc. But this is I agree that we need to focus on the customer in terms of these infrastructure projects, but the customer is typically other infrastructure projects or other Web3 projects that can leverage our technologies and kind of reach to the consumer. So it's more so, we have to be clear about who the customer is or who are the use cases of these middleware technologies. So in terms of, I guess, priorities, I still firmly believe that, we have to remember that in Web3, we're kind of solving problems that have already been solved. So it's a tricky place. It's a tricky place to start from, but this is where I think we need to remember the values of what brings us here, and we need to remember that decentralization is very difficult, and we need to kind of go the hard way. And sometimes that is not aligned to what the customer wants. The customer might want something faster and more convenient, but we have to push back gently on this and keep true to our core. But of course, also work with other projects to eventually be able to compete and eventually be 10 miles ahead of anything in Web 2. So I think that working together is basically the superpower of the industry. We're all permissionless, open, and we can work together. So the sum of the parts is certainly greater than anything that the Web 2 can provide. So yeah, this is a bit of a ramble, but this is how I kind of see the kind of customer relationship versus and the balance of decentralization.
I also had one more point that so the question you asked was like, where are we in the adoption curve? I think we're there where we've realized that tokens and NFTs are two brilliant things. Decentralization is the third thing. I think we're also in the point of figuring out how all the three of these things blend together and what you can do with it, right? Like every other week I see an NFT project where I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like some new use case I even thought of. So I think we're just still in that experimentation space, but we're crossing the chasm.
Okay, so this wasn't set up, but this leads to my next question that I really wanted to cover. So I wanted to talk a little bit about inflection points, whether they have already taken place in the past or they might take place in the future. And something like when I think or talk about inflection points, one really big thing comes to mind, which is kind of the tornado cash situation that happened a couple months ago. So there was, sending money anonymously for whatever reason, for some donation or something else, is a practical use case that we need today. Something that happened is there were U.S. sanctions, and kind of those that were supporting that transmission had to block some of that traffic. So to me, that was an inflection point in terms of here's a use case where you need to send money anonymously, and here's a use case, and here's shilling the kind of pocket and the vision here, decentralized RPC. You need decentralized access points to products in the Web3 world. So we're still working towards it. The entire industry is working towards it, but to me that was kind of something really big. But to take a very much simpler inflection point is literally this morning I was listening to a podcast. Brian Armstrong was on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and he said that the inflection point for Coinbase was at a buy Bitcoin button on their website. As simple as that sounds, that was kind of the inflection point for the adoption kind of in the US in terms of crypto. So I guess my question to the panel, maybe we can start with you, but it's whether it was 200 years ago and will be in 100 years or has been in recent past, like what do you think needs to happen or can you imagine happening to really turn up that adoption curve?
So I think when we think about it from a very macro sense, it's hard to think about specific inflection points because solutions are generalized, but use cases and actually how people use it are very specific. So in particular, the buy button for Coinbase is a great example, but of an inflection point just specifically for the US market for the purchase of Bitcoin and speculation on cryptocurrencies. MetaMask had an inflection point with regards to 2020 and 2021 where you had a lot of emerging markets, Indonesia, Philippines, some parts of Africa, not having access to equity markets and having a lot of liquidity from the quantitative easing of the governments, right? And then that results in speculation or people wanting to put their money somewhere, and then they don't have access to equities, so they go to invest in cryptocurrencies and different forms of that. And therefore that was that inflection point and why that popped up. So I mean, I think in terms of future inflection points, I don't know, I see a lot of micro ones in particular, and I think that's where I can share a little bit of my experience because we're integrating quite a few different wallets, and the wallets that really have been kind of seeing traction, the NFT wallets like you'd expect, those ones have been seeing a lot of, or gaming wallets, a lot of them that you've been seeing traction in specific cases today, but also here in Latin America, there's actually 2 or 3 wallets, Zulu, I'm butchering the name, Transpoca or something like that, as well as another which is garnering usage in particular because there aren't that many banked here, right? So 7% banked, but 80% people have a phone. So it's quite a clear use case for saving, for example. And I think for them, they're waiting for regulation to shift and to become a little bit more approachable, especially here in Colombia, for that to be the inflection point. That might be that for them in particular.
So a regulatory inflection point?
Yeah, at least here in Colombia in specific, and in some of the Latin countries. At least that's what they've been telling me. They've been doing decently. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. As a whole, I think it's a very hard question to answer because it would have to come with a use case, and you would be then saying the next use case for it would be, I don't know, like a decentralized Twitter or something like that.
Decentralized cats.
But I have no idea. You know, it's really hard to tell.
I don't think it's going to be a clone of Twitter. I don't think it's going to be decentralized Twitter, but I do think there's a big inflection point coming, which is the first sort of breakout mainstream, what we would have called social media application that's tied into Web3 primitives. I think it's more likely to be a creator-centric application, like creators to communities, rather than just traditional social media where you're like following your friends. But we're going to see like the next TikTok scale app emerge, and it's going to be connected to Web3 in some way because creates such better experiences for the creators, their communities, and even the apps themselves in terms of ability to distribute digital content with ownership and kind of monetization primitives attached to make your users owners, your communities owners, and that is so powerful. And I think the building blocks are there, which is why I think we're close to this tipping point, if you will, because all it really takes is sort of the right, product visionary with the right mechanism just at the right time to catch that lightning in a bottle and see that growth that crosses over to millions of users, and that'll onboard a whole new set of people that just, DeFi was not addressable to them. Maybe NFTs began to be addressable to them, but here you're just kind of engaging with media, and that's something that, billions of people in the world do every day.
I think it's interesting because like everyone here is infrastructure, and this is INFRACON, so yeah. I think it's the better the infrastructure gets, the better the tooling gets, the better the easier it is for people to wrap their head around the use cases. I've seen developers who have said, I don't want to do this because like I have my vision, but I don't know where to start to get the tooling, to get the infrastructure, to build this. And like it's like I have the vision, but there's so many steps that make things easier to execute in Web 2. Like it's just the developer experience is a million times better. We're getting there. Like I think back to 2018. From 2018 to 2020, I don't know who was super active in crypto. There wasn't that much going on. It was like data standards, stable coins, the rise of centralized exchanges, wallet UX got a lot better, and staking infrastructure went from like running a master node on AWS to like just sending money to a wallet and just pushing a button. But that stuff brought in whole new waves of L1s who had their own visions and their own ideas, which pushed all sorts of new narratives like NFTs, all the things about NFTs, all these things about communities, DAOs, like all that stuff really took off because the infrastructure was there. So I think what everybody here is doing is building better decentralized, centralized, or just better infrastructure in general to empower the next developers and save them the question marks and the guessing of, well, how do I do this and this and this and this and this, and get them off to the races as quickly as possible to build the next TikTok, to build the next Twitter, to build the next Electronic Arts or whatever it is.
Yeah, it helps them iterate faster and then fail faster.
Yeah, exactly.
And for us to find a better use case.
Yeah, the curve is getting there, and everyone's sort of seeing it. Like there's pockets of brilliance all over the place, no pun intended. But there's pockets of brilliance all over the place with like some of these things. Yeah, exactly. There's all these use cases where everyone's seeing. They're like, oh, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. But like eventually something's just gonna catch fire. Like that's what we're seeing. We're just setting up the tinder.
Yeah, and I think that NFTs took fire. We've seen this year, last year. That was like a bit of a taste of what's to come. And I think, who knows what it will be, but I think we all have conviction that it will happen very soon, that there's going to be this mass adoption through some sort of social networking app. And I think, can't wait for this. But in terms of the inflection point, it's hard to know what it will be, but we know it's coming. But we can also talk about the individual inflection points, because I think if you ask around the developers here or anybody in Web3, they typically have a bit of a war story of when centralization kind of hurt them. And Vitalik, he said his World of Warcraft character was like culled, or they changed the spell parameters or something like this. He cried himself to sleep. Then he built Ethereum as like a big FU to the platforms, and this kind of happens like with everybody. For me, it was my earlier startup that was crushed by Google, and I was like, goodness, I'll never do another startup again. And then Web3 came along, and it kind of changed the game. And these stories, they're not uncommon. I imagine that everybody has these stories, and when we see the opportunity there, and as is spoken, when the infrastructure is ready, then we're going to see these wildfire events, and it's going to be wild.
Yeah, so you said everyone, like, we're all building middleware infrastructure, middleware protocols, it's all infrastructure, and it's kind of a chicken or the egg problem where it's like the inflection point will happen at some point. We're just kind of setting everything up, putting all the building blocks into place. And I like the analogy you had of there's going to be a lot of data, people are going to need to index that data, but you didn't have a customer on day one, right?
Yeah, I think we're there in the sense that we build something there, and I think this applies to everybody here, is you build something, you get users, and then the question is, okay, well, we've built this, it's working to some degree. It's like not at mass scale that you'd want it to be, but like, what's next? And you start building the next thing for the next set of users, right? And like, I think that's where we're all at. I think we're seeing the progress, we're just so in it that we're not recognizing it a lot of the times.
But do you think it's the responsibility of the middleware protocols and the infrastructure teams to find that use case, or are we just setting it up for someone else to find that use case?
LivePeer's been live for 4.5 years. Those first 2 years, it was sort of just building the network, the supply side, just the infrastructure itself. And what we found was that, like, it was not an if you build it, they will come scenario. Like, we found that we needed to build the product and the business functions like sales and business development and support to be able to go out and educate the market, to create a really easy onboarding experience, to create gateways. And that was the thing that began to, kind of accelerate the demand and make the usage more mature and get on a path to growth. Now, of course, we want to be just one of many that are doing that, and it's an open network that anyone can use. But still, even a couple years later, it's clear that you do have to play a pretty key role in like meeting the market where it is and educating them and bringing them along the journey. And I think if we didn't do that, we'd be sitting with much less demand side usage than we did today.
Yeah, and like internally we say at Streamr, job one is to build this decentralized technology. It's 5 years of research and development where we're walking a very hard road, and it looks like we'll get there, but that's like the bare minimum vision of success. The real goal is to get this technology adopted in the wild and make others successful and export value.
Okay, so in terms of, like, you talk about, going out and education and building the tooling for, to start growing the demand side. So my next question here is, as you're doing this reach out and you're trying to reach out to different users, who would you say your target audience is right now? And when I'm talking about target audience, like the cool thing about crypto is this mix of academia and engineering and kind of long-term visions. But right now, like where we are in 2022, would you say, are you mainly reaching out to the end user or academic institutions or developers, or is it small or big businesses? Like, where's your focus now, like for the project right here?
I can start, I guess. So for context, we are B2B2C. So we allow like applications or wallets to have a better user experience onboarding, as well as let their users lose keys less, basically. So ultimately, our target market is, everybody knows Web3 has wallets, and there are tons of different wallets. It's quite a fragmented ecosystem that's popping up, which is kind of half unfortunate, but at the same time, it's good for us because more people using us in different ways. But as we've seen, so that was the initial 2019 to 2020, and even 2021. But as NFTs and use cases other than DeFi started cropping up, we started seeing more Web 2 entities really wanting to start playing in the game. So right now, one of our main target markets have been Web 2 trying to move to Web 3. And in specific, this isn't like startups this is like people like, for example, chess.com, who has a user base of like 77 million users already, wanting to transition their users into being able to use Web 3 in particular. So, and they want to do so because they want to monetize off NFTs, they want to do games on NFTs, Tiffany & Co. wants to build something on that. But I think in particular that's what we're starting to see, and that's what we're doubling down on as well. Yeah, I mean, for us, we don't just do like Web3 conferences anymore. We did GDC, which is the gaming conference earlier in the year. We did the Korean gaming conference. We also did some of the larger consumer brand conferences, just to kind of get that, get those people who are interested,
There's a cycle. So we spend, I think our largest line item in terms of expenses outside of staff is, I think, hackathons. We spend an ungodly amount of money on hackathons. Like it's a lot. It's a lot of money. The reason
you
is
give us numbers.
Oh, no, in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Not joking. Like it's a lot of money, and a lot of time and a lot of resources. People go to hackathons. If you look at the hackathons and you look at the projects, that's indicative of what's going to come, because you'll always see overlap. If you have like 120 people, you'll see like, okay, there's 18 who built a very similar use case. Some are obviously built better than others, but that really sets the case of once you look at the hackathon data and you like tag some of the submissions, that sort of says, okay, well, this will probably hit market in like 6 to 9 months, right? And then you can start thinking, well, how do we create code templates, do some of these things? And at that point, once some of these things get successful, you'll see it go through the cycle of early crypto companies that have been funded, and then you'll see it go to Web 2 or Web 3, like some more Web 2 companies that are looking to move into Web 3, and it'll go through this cycle, and eventually you'll have some Fortune 500 email you saying, hey, I saw this use case that you serve, and now we're here to we're here to ask questions. That's sort of the cycle that we look at, because it's an adoption curve. Like I mentioned before, we're crossing the chasm. I think we're seeing the same thing here. Things just take a little longer, and to us, when you see that thing on Twitter of us saying like that one feature that's like, oh my God, that's brilliant, it's going to change the world, it probably takes 6 to 9 months, for like maybe even longer in a lot of cases, for that to catch fire and people to build on top of that first idea of genius, but then that to grow into something else. So we see hackathons as sort of the gateway for whatever comes next. And obviously, like that gives you like a decent amount of time to prep and like figure out what's going to come. So that's how we look at it, and it's worked really well for us.
Cool. So we have a pretty good idea of who our target user is, right? It's these developers, these projects that are building Web3 social applications, Web3 creator applications. But the big challenge in this early market, which is moves so quickly, is still developing, is like, what is the best mechanism to get to them? What is the level that they want to integrate with and use this technology in order to bring this capability? And so that really has us in this like fast-moving, iterative, experimental phase, which you could call like a traditional like product market fit search, which is not something that we've made up in Web3. There's a lot of knowledge and best practices and whatnot from the traditional world. Is it hackathons? Is it direct active outreach? Is it partnering with layer 1 and layer 2 dev ecosystems in order to jointly approach their developers and say, hey, you can build social apps on this platform, right? And these are all the sorts of experiments that we try and run, we try and learn from really quickly. I think we need to do a good job of identifying what's not working or what's really inefficient in terms of spending, because if you're spending millions of dollars on one of these channels and it's not working, can that be used more efficiently elsewhere? And that's something we have to do in the face of trying to accelerate this market into existence. So I think it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely hard to build in this early space, but it's also really energizing and really exciting when you actually enable some success and you see some sort of new innovation that's possible because of what you're doing, and that keeps everyone really motivated to be on the journey.
Yeah, for us, and I think more generally speaking, it really depends on the project. For some projects, it makes a lot of sense to go Web 2 first. For us, we did try Web 2 first in the early days, but we really see product market fit, and like the optimal strategy is to work with these Web 3 projects as early as possible in these hackathons or as some sort of developer grant to kind of get them going. And so I think that's very important for us because we are a bit more of a low-level protocol or infrastructure or middleware. And so to reach out to like the Web 2 consumers, it's a bit of a hard sell for us. But what we can do is kind of support the Web 3 projects that are in our ecosystem that use our technology, and they can really focus in on their communities, and they can make traction in the consumer mainstream Web 2 space far better than what we can.
You mentioned grants. I want to ask a question real quick because this is something that's so strange to me. So in like,
do you want a grant?
The traditional world, it's like users want to use the product that you have, they value it, they exchange value and pay for it as they go, or in some other model. In this world, everyone starts building on you, and then the first question they ask is, can we get a grant? Like, will you give us money in order to continue building on your platform? And I think there's like an interesting question here. So is that a signal that there's not really a product market fit because they're not willing to exchange value to use what you're building? Or is that the power of token economics and Web3 that you actually have the chance to make them kind of an embedded owner in your ecosystem to build with you, to inspire and help enable others who will come in the future? I think it remains to be seen, but curious about people's opinions.
I think we've given out like 3 grants ever. Specifically because like hackathons is one thing because you're paying people to reward their curiosity, but I think it depends if someone's going to come and say we're going to build infrastructure, like hardcore infrastructure to enhance what you're doing and save you time and expand your, grow your TAM, grow your user base, like that is like, yeah, 100% we'll give you money because it's addressable and it will actually scale what we're doing. I think with Web3, what you see this, do we throw anybody under the bus? I don't know. Like you see some of these blockchains who have raised ungodly amounts of money have insane market caps. There's 11 employees there, and they're just like they're buying their traction, and it's like they've capped. I think back. Like I'll reference a quick story. Like I remember in 2018, I met this. This is a really long story, but like I met this group of female angel investors from Lagos, Nigeria, and they had this women-run syndicate. And they said, oh, we invest in ICOs. And I said, what? How did you do this? Why? They said, because we can't get access to anything in America or anything in Europe. Like we can't get access to this deal flows. They were just investing in all these super sketchy ICOs. And I think that's like people were raising money all over the world and sort of became the standard to raise hundreds of millions or like get billion-dollar market caps without actually having a fully fleshed out product. I think the appetite for that is decreasing, where you're seeing DAOs who are getting product market fit with NFTs and different things, and then like they'll get some money by launching a token and they'll figure out how to give that out. But like it's sort of going back to the Web 2 roots, but I think we sort of ran away in Web 3 with people who got carried away with their imagination by having these tokens that could one day be worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's like get rich, right? It's like that's what you're doing, and so when everybody knows everyone has money, it almost makes sense to ask for grants because it becomes the norm.
Yeah, it's a really rabbit hole kind of discussion. I think we are replacing intrinsic motivation to build on these decentralized technologies with economic incentives. And sometimes it's a little disappointing when a developer comes and they want to build something, build a script, and it's like, oh, can we have a grant for this? Well, back in my day, I just I built without the grants, but I think it comes down to a question of it comes down to how do I put this? Like it's just a fundraising kind of sort of discussion and decision to invest in your ecosystem. And there will be projects that don't deserve the money that still ask for the money. There are projects that maybe deserve the money and don't ask for it, and there are projects that deserve the money and ask for it. And you just need to be very savvy about, I guess, investing into your ecosystem and invest for the right reasons. I agree that there's a lot of pay to play in this space, unfortunately. It's very difficult to see from the outside as well. They want, big projects want to show traction, and so the easiest route to that traction is to pay people to use your stuff. But there's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of projects that really deserve and need funding to kind of make it to the next level to compete with Web 2, and so we really need to kind of be savvy about who we invest in and for what reasons.
Yeah, so we've been making a lot of Web 2, Web 3 analogies, but personally, one of the things that I really like, especially at conferences like this, is also meeting a lot of people from the Web 1 community, which to me is a bit more of a history lesson, but I love learning for those around me. So one of the things, when I was on the plane, I was talking to the person next to me, someone from Consensus Mesh, and he was reading a book and brought up DARPANET, or DARPA, and the whole idea is the internet, right, Web 1.0 was started kind of by the government, then kind of moved into the academic realm, and then it was taken over by engineers, and then kind of more so the user, and to me, the inflection point there was like Mosaic and Netscape. Like that's really when we got mass adoption after years of cyberpunks kind of driving it and academic institutions doing research on it. One of the big differences, and we kind of touched on it right now in terms of raising money and then distributing that money with Web3, is this was very much not started by the government. This was very much started by the cyberpunks, so we skipped one step. But in order to really get the funding to take it off, it was this kind of crowdsourcing the funds, which didn't come from the government, and then kind of distributing it back to the user. So, I mean, if there's something anyone here wants to add on that point, feel free. But I think my question here is really, how much do you think we need kind of government buy-in in the next 1 to 5 years to increase protocol, the demand side of protocol, if any, or if it might even be too early for now?
It definitely helps. Because of fiat to crypto on-ramps, it really definitely helps. I mean, and we've seen, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see, like, different ecosystems and how they've reacted to crypto. For example, for India, they banned crypto initially, right? And now they're opening up to it. And then for a period they were opening up to it, and then now they're gray again. And then China just outright was open to it, and then outright just banned it all the way. Japan also kind of started off okay. Then I think in the very early Bitcoin phases, they clamped down, and now they're thinking about opening up. And I think personally, as I talk to projects and as I see projects coming out of these different locations, I think it actually does matter quite a bit. Like, the amount of Japanese projects actually doing crypto and all has dropped drastically in the last 3 years as Japan clamped down on things. And there's only 1 or 2 or 3 of them out there now at this point in time. And now as they're talking about opening it up a little bit more, now you've got people a little bit more excited, and you've got people eager to be potentially tapping onto. I know this one that's an arts auction platform, and there's another one. And so I think unfortunately, it does help. I mean, as much as we don't want it to affect things, I think it does to a large extent.
We have less control there, unlike conferences and hackathons.
I have a recurring call with a bank, a very large bank, every quarter, just for fun. We just get on the call, we shoot the shit. They have somebody there who uses us for something, for their data analysis. And he said, let's just have this going on an ongoing basis. And I asked the question, I said, so when am I going to be able to deposit Bitcoin in my Canadian bank? And he says, it's coming. We just have all of this government overhead and all of these things. And I find it interesting that from the regulatory perspective, and I'm Canadian, so I'm going to speak from my perspective, is that it's fear, it's crypto's uncertain, it's all of these crazy things until the government can figure out how to manage it and how to issue compliance around it. And I think that's just a nature of the beast. There's fear. There's people who are putzing around the sidelines. They're figuring out their own ways to get involved. But the government doesn't necessarily want to stunt it, because if you stunt it for the exact reason, you see you're stunting technology. You're taking yourself out of what's going to be a very competitive market, or it is increasingly competitive market. And so there's this fine line that regulators have to walk between how much am I going to allow, and at one point am I going to open the floodgates further to allow more people or more economic activity, more financial activity, and like how much more control am I going to give up? So I don't know the answer. I think it's sort of like we're saying here how every once in a while there's that light of brilliance where one person just one application or one feature shines, or like one NFT collection or like one DeFi product launches something like that's the thing and moves us all forward. I think it's the same thing in the regulatory. I think in some cases somebody makes a regulation that pushes us forward, or in some cases somebody does something on the regulatory front that just pulls us back. Or it doesn't pull us back, but it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because you have to think of how these things are actually going to scale and how they're going to work when there are 1 billion people actively on chain. So I don't know, but I don't think there's a silver bullet for it.
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic actually about this one. I think that we have some good governments in the world, we have some bad governments, and we certainly, the space accelerates when the good governments lean in and provide clarity and just acceptance and validation of the technology. But we don't necessarily need their backing. And like as mentioned, it is the nature of the beast that they are the slowest moving, most conservative sort of entities in the space, and that makes sense. We don't want them to kind of bring in this technology to our passports and then have gas spikage or some sort of event. And we have to be realistic and pragmatic that we do have challenges and we haven't fully overcome them yet. But I believe that the space has enough bright minds. We have the critical mass now to succeed with or without government help. I think government help is inevitable. It's just kind of how the cookie crumbles is just, we'll see it play out, and I certainly hope that governments are more supportive in the future rather than cracking down, but I think we're unstoppable at this point.
Yeah, I'm glad we have an optimist here. I'm more of a pessimist on this one. I think we're talking about governments. They took 20 years to figure out how to do sales tax on e-commerce after everything changed, from physical brick and mortar to the internet. How are they ever going to keep up with the pace of innovation in this space? And if you look at the 4 kind of clear examples of disruption that blockchain and crypto have enabled, ICOs, DeFi, NFTs, and DAOs, each of these has been almost like a regulatory arbitrage on some innovation that moved faster ahead of the kind of broken systems that were being enforced by regulation at the time. And then, the governments have no choice but to then be reactive and to try and figure out, and they don't want to stifle innovation, and they don't want to miss this opportunity, so they try and understand it, but it takes them years to actually give guidance, which they still haven't given yet. And so I think we just have to, I don't think we can be relying on the governments to do something that will all of a sudden open the floodgates for demand. I think we have to keep innovating, capture that demand, and work hand in hand with kind of educating well-intentioned regulators along the side such that they can help or at the minimum do no harm.
What he said.
So we educate people in the government. Okay, I'm still gonna go back to my original idea. I think when we get someone in the government who's really into decentralized cats, we've crossed the chasm.
Just send them some, they're cute, they like them.
So, okay, we have 3 minutes left. So I just wanted to ask, does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to pose to the panel?
Yeah. So my name is Nate. I'm a tokenomics researcher and advisor. I actually created the demand-side tokenomics framework. So really interested in the question that you guys were talking about. Thank you. I'm interested to talk or hear more about the question of whether a request for grants is indicative of a lack of product market fit. I think if your use of your protocol implies use of your token, then it should be a good thing and you should want to give those grants out. But being infrastructure, sometimes it's difficult to integrate a token. What have been your biggest challenges in thinking about how to include a token in your protocol?
When token? You can token. No, seriously. We have a token. It's in retrospect, we should have changed things, but you could have different iterations of white papers and stuff. Infrastructure is different. Infrastructure is like you want to prove that you have product market fit. Launching a token later is probably the better thing to do. I think you're starting to see that as a trend with more projects. It's like, well, let's just build it, let's get product market fit, let's figure out a token later, and let's build something people actually want. We're fortunate enough that we actually have lots of people building on us and using us because we're data infrastructure, and lots of projects need data. So infrastructure is different because it's a lot harder to build, and the go-to market isn't fork Uniswap V2, add some liquidity to some token that you made up, and like just launch it with a bunch of marketing and NFT cats. There's a lot more work to it, so I think it's very different when it comes to infrastructure.
Yeah, I think just really practically in the LivePeer network, the token plays a role only in the supply side of the network, those who are running the nodes, providing the infrastructure. And there's no direct connection between the demand side usage and the token. And that's both a missed opportunity, but also an opportunity for, it's a decentralized project with decentralized governance that can evolve. How can this community rectify or address that to help better get token in the hands of the demand side? Would love to know what the demand side token framework looks like.
If you have a blog where you just take all existing token models and be like, this is what they should do, I think you'd get 1 million subscribers. Like, I would read that.
I basically have that, so I'd love to talk about it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'll
When
just
token for the blog.
No worries. I'll just add that I don't think grants invalidate product market fit, but it does sort of blur the outside perspective of traction. So I totally get that.
Well, I'll actually add one more point. The other thing back to grants where I think is interesting is that in some cases it makes a lot of sense because like I've seen companies where like I got a grant to do X from Polygon or from Avalanche, and that validates saying, okay, well they seem to think that you have something if you're in the early stages where you can actually go and build a business and get VC funding and do other things. So there's a flip side to both, depending on how much, but also depending like how good is the team doing it, all the standard startup things, but it's almost like an early customer. Like I can think of a handful of projects that have done that I know personally.
I would love to add to that from a different perspective because unlike U3 protocols, we don't have a token. We had the choice. We went through 2 bull runs, so we had the choice to do the token twice. We were very tempted, very, very tempted. But we're on the other side of the coin where we don't have as much liquidity and as much kind of like cash to give out grants. And so we can't give out grants in particular. I kind of wish we could. I think it adds a value of defensibility to what you guys are doing. So like the fact that you guys managed to raise that amount of money and have that amount of liquidity and be able to also like kind of like quantitatively finance and issue more and give people stuff makes it such that competitors can't come into space and like fight with you. That's the biggest thing that I've seen on my end and go like, maybe the overhead of having a token might have been better because like competitors can't come and fight. I mean, for L1s, perhaps not, but for infrastructure, I think there are not that many people doing what we do in particular, and it's very niche. So when you dominate, you just dominate. Right now, I have like 3 Chinese clones trying to be a fast follow, and I'm like, dude, like maybe it's time.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I really don't think grants invalidate any sort of product market fit. It's, in a sense, like I see it as another word for marketing or another word for like supporting users or kind of decentralized, like instead of like hiring everybody to the team, it's kind of like crowdsourcing the team in a sense. So it's, maybe the word has some negative connotation to it, but I actually see it as a pretty big pro in the industry.
But also like grants from an infrastructure perspective, I think are somewhat different than grants from an L1 perspective. Right, like grants from an L1 are basically like I'm paying people to come and do anything creatively. Whereas grants from an infrastructure perspective, it's a little easier to evaluate and be like, well, how is this going to add more developers, or how is this going to save us time in internal R&D, or how is this going to be an open source thing that other people are going to use, right? Whereas I've seen on the other side, some of the larger L1s, or they'll be like, here's $500,000, go build. They'll give literally, they'll give $500,000 to 7 different companies to do the exact same thing, and it's like, okay, well, it's an interesting approach, but.
All right. On that note, we're already 2 minutes over, and I think food is somewhere around the corner. So without further ado, thank you to the panel, and
Thanks,
let's go
everyone.
get some lunch.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, guys.